Γεια σας αγαπητοί μας φίλοι, καλώς ήρθατε στο πρόγραμμα και χρόνια πολλά σε όλους. Χριστός Ανέστη.
Αληθώς ο Κύριος, χρόνια πολλά τώρα.
Χρόνια πολλά Μπάμπρα.
Χρόνια πολλά to all our viewers.
Απόψε έχουμε προετοιμάσει ένα καταπληκτικό πρόγραμμα για σας, κατάλληλο για αυτές τις μέρες, λόγω του ότι σύντομα θα έχουμε την ημέρα του Άνζακ, τις 25 του Απριλίου. Είναι μια ημέρα σημαντική για την Αυστραλία και φέτος βέβαια ιδιαίτερα σημαντική γιατί είναι 100 χρόνια από το 1915 που έγινε η εκστρατεία στην Καλύπολη και ο Οργανισμός Ελληνίδων και Ελληνοκυπρίων Γυναικών της Αυστραλίας διοργάνωσε μια κατάλληλη εκδήλωση για να τιμήσει και να αναγνωρίσει τις προσφορές των νοσοκόμων που πήγαν στο νησί το ελληνικό τη Λίμνο για να φροντίσουν τους τραυματίες του πολέμου. Και βέβαια το νησί ήταν κατάλληλο γιατί λόγω της γεωγραφικής του θέσης η Ελλάδα παρεχώρησε το νησί αυτό, τη Λίμνο, για να μπορέσουν να τοποθετήσουν τους τραυματίες και οι νοσοκόμες πήγαν από την Αυστραλία για να τους περιποιηθούν. Και συγχαρητήρια στον οργανισμό Oeega που διοργάνωσε την εκδήλωση αυτή. Πολύ ωραία, ήταν καταπληκτικά όλα, άψογα και ενημερώθηκαν όσοι παραβρέθηκαν και θα τα δείτε και εσείς σε λίγο.
April the 25th commemorates Anzac Day, a very significant event on the Australian and New Zealand calendar, and it's 2015 which commemorates, it's the anniversary of 100 years since the landing of Gallipoli. Now there are many events being hosted around Australia, but often they are acknowledging and honouring people in the front line. But Oeega, a wonderful women's organisation here in Adelaide, took the initiative to honour the Australian nurses that went over to the island of Lemnos under very primitive conditions to care for the wounded soldiers from Australia and New Zealand. This was a very significant event to honour these wonderful women, and we feel very proud to be presenting this to you on this program. So we congratulate Oeega and we wish them all the very best. And we hope and we are sure that you will find this segment very interesting and informative.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? Can you hear them as they march into eternity? There will never be a greater love. There just couldn't be a greater sacrifice. There just couldn't be.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? The ones who fought and gave their all?
Heroes marching. Can you hear them as they march into eternity? There will never be a greater love. There just couldn't be a greater sacrifice. There just couldn't be.
Australia's heroes marching. They're marching once again across our great land.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? Can you hear them as they march into eternity? There will never be a greater love.
Good to see you again.
The leader of the opposition.
Representing Chief Justice Chris Carruthers, Mr. Andreas Andrews, Consul General of Greece, and we've met his bishop, the Branch.
Lan, how are you, my dear? How are you? Good to see you.
I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Mary King, who was a Second World War veteran representing all nurses. Thank you.
Thank you. You may be seated. This afternoon we are hosting you on a historic and heartwarming journey that has been 100 years in the making. On the 25th of April 2015, our nation will commemorate 100 years of the Anzac tradition of mateship. This is the greatest cultural tradition that Australia observes. The Anzac spirit is about personal sacrifice, the willingness of Australian men and women to give up their lives for their mates and to serve their country in war. We are here today to commemorate, honour and celebrate the work, the courage, the lives of 130 pioneering nurses who left their comfortable Australian homes in 1915 to serve their country half a world away on a windy, desolate coast of the North Aegean Sea on the Greek island of Lemnos. We also celebrate the everlasting friendship forged between Australia and Lemnos that these legendary Anzac women helped to create. Our program commences with the laying of remembrance wreaths in commemoration of these wonderful 1915 Anzac nurses. We invite those laying wreaths to come forward as your name is called.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? Can you hear them as they march into eternity? There will never be a greater love. There just couldn't be a greater sacrifice. There just couldn't be.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? The ones who fought and gave their all?
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? Can you hear them as they march into eternity? There will never be a greater love. There just couldn't be a greater sacrifice that just couldn't be.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? They're marching once again across our great land.
With me I have Mrs. Mary Keane, who is one of the former nurses who served in World War II. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And can you tell us, Mrs. Keane, your experience? How was it?
Oh, I was in England during the war, the Second World War. I became a nurse at 17, and I was nursing about 17 miles from London, and then we had all the air raids, and we had a lot of air raid victims, lots of children, unfortunately, and I nursed for about 5 years, and the main one of that is after the D-Day landings from Normandy, and they were coming in by the boatload, and we worked every day, all night. For 3 weeks I didn't see my bed because we were short of nurses, so we slept up against the wall and then continued on.
Yes.
It was a hectic time.
Hectic time. And how did that impact on your whole life?
Oh, well, my whole life, yes. I still remember it, but I was very lucky to get through it. Some very close encounters with bombs and bullets and things, but I've had a good life, thank you.
That's great. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very
And
much.
today here I believe you line a wreath for the 100 years of Anzac.
Yes, I understand I am, and I feel that's a great honour for those nurses. They went through a shocking time.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, we are very proud, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
I welcome and thank you for your company today to commemorate the forgotten Anzac heroines, those courageous Australian women who worked in appalling conditions in the tented Australian General Hospital on the Greek island of Lemnos. The Oeega Committee is proud to recognise and celebrate the stoic, determined spirit of those brave Australian women who helped forge everlasting bonds of friendship between Australia and the Greek island of Lemnos. It is my pleasure to let you know that part proceeds from today's event will be donated to Legacy, which is a charity providing services to Australian families suffering financially and socially after the incapacitation or death of a spouse or parent during or after their Defence Force service. We are honoured to participate in this Anzac Centenary commemoration and convey our hope that you enjoy this unique afternoon of remembrance and tribute. I look forward to seeing you at future Oeega events. I now ask His Grace, Bishop Nicholas of the Leon, to bless the food.
With me I have Petula Columbus, who is the secretary of Oeega organization. Hello Petula. And
hello,
first
Dora.
of all, congratulations for this wonderful event. I believe it was your initiative to commemorate the nurses that went to the Gallipoli and also
Yes.
to the Island of Lemnos.
Yes.
And would you like to tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, I wanted to find a connection for this very special year between perhaps Greece and Anzac, and I knew that Greece was not fighting at Gallipoli, so they would not be part of the Anzac legend. But I did find that in my research that the Anzac nurses who were in Lemnos Island, which was given to the Allies by the Greek government because the Greeks were not fighting at Gallipoli, and the Australian nurses headed to Lemnos Island and were there from the 9th of August 1915 for 8 months as part of the Gallipoli campaign. And when I read their stories and the suffering and the under-resourced with medical supplies and food, and sometimes not even paid for being there, I was very moved, and I wondered if our committee would be able to commemorate and to honour these women and their work by having this event today. And I was just very lucky that Helen and the wonderful women of our committee saw that this connection was very important between Lemnos and the Anzac nurses. And July of last year, I was on a tour of the Adelaide Oval with some friends who are volunteers at this museum, and when I spoke to them about how they would put this event into place, they suggested these barracks, and they suggested that everything here was perfect for hosting an event of that kind. And they also thought it was wonderful that we were honouring Australian women who were the first Australian women to be shipped overseas as nurses, the 130 of them, and 2 very, very important ones from Adelaide, Sister Anne Donnell, who can be researched under Australian heroines, or Australian war nurses. She is indeed considered one of the heroines, and Sister Olive Haynes, whose book inspired the series The Anzac Girls, and they're both from Adelaide. So reading their journals and their diaries, I was very moved, and often I would go to bed with those women and the appalling conditions that they worked in, but also the other lovely things that they did for those wounded and dying, that if they hadn't been there, many of those men may have died, more so than already had. I believe the hospital, the tent hospitals were built to house 1,000 patients, but they were actually nursing 1,200 patients at a time.
Yeah, amazing.
They were amazing women who made do with very little, but who left behind an incredible legacy for current nursing today.
It's great that you acknowledge and honour the nurses
absolutely.
today.
We have to continue to do this, so that their memory is never forgotten, because they are as important to Anzac, and their contribution is everlasting, just as the friendship with Lemnos that they created is everlasting.
Thank you for that, Petula.
Thank you, Dora.
Congratulations to you and to the rest of the committee.
Well, thank you to the wonderful Helen and our wonderful committee, because without their assistance it wouldn't have happened.
Another great event from Oeega.
Another great event. Thank you too, Dora. Thank you.
Today, Oeega is hosting an event to acknowledge and honour the nurses who contributed a lot in 1915 in the island of Lemnos. I have with me the president of Oeega, Mrs. Hellenic, who will explain the events today. Hello, Helen.
Hello, Dora, how are you?
Very well, thank you. And first of all, congratulations for another successful event.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful, yes, I must say. It was a wonderful event. We were commemorating, as you said, the Australian nurses in World War I that went to the Australian hospital in Lemnos.
And this year is a very important year. It's 100 years since 1915. And you had the guest speaker?
Yes, we did. We commemorated the centenary of World War I, and in particular the nurses going across in August of 1915. With our guest speaker was Major Christopher Rowe, who is the manager of the Army Museum here at Keswick Army Barracks, who spoke about the connection, basically, of the nurses and the contribution that Lemnos made to our soldiers, where they provided provided the whole island, basically, for hospitals for our soldiers to be shipped across to Lemnos for convalescing and whatever, yes.
Yeah, they face hard times there because the different country and different circumstances.
It was a desolate island. It was a barren island. When they went there was nothing, not even a tree was there. And when the nurses got there, they were expected at least the ship to come where they had their tents, but even that didn't come. So in the first few days, they actually slept out under the stars in August. It was warm, which was fair enough. And then the ship came across with the tents. So it was a tented hospitals, but they did the best they can. And as our guest speaker said, only 3% of the injured soldiers that came to Lemnos actually passed away. It was due to the magnificent help, looking after of the caring of the nurses, particularly Major Nurse Wilson, magnificent lady, yes.
That's great. Thank you for that, Helen. And today you had a very successful event. You pleased with that?
Very happy with it. The wreath laying was magnificent as well. We did an excellent job of the wreath laying first, and then we came here for lunch. Now, the lunch was all put on by the volunteers of the Army Museum. We thank them very much. Lovely, a Greek-themed lunch, actually, and a Greek dessert as well. And then now, at the moment, they're all going over for a tour of the museum, which has been done up as it showing World War I and the nurses in Lemnos. Just for us, thank you.
And you had many officials here today?
Yes, we're very, very fortunate that both governments, the government and the opposition, we had our official guest, special guest was Mrs. Lan Lay, representing His Excellency the Honourable Governor-General Mr. Hugh Van Lay, and a lot of other dignitaries, yes, well, thank them very much as well.
That's great. Thank you for that, Helen. Is there anything else that Oeega is preparing?
Yes, we are. Once again this year, we're taking part in South Australian History Month of May, and on the 24th of May, we're having a food forum at the chapel of the Migration Museum, and we're calling it It's More Than Souvlaki. You know, our Greek cuisine is not souvlaki. You don't get too many people cooking souvlaki for dinner. So we have the original Mediterranean diet, and we have a guest speaker, and we're going to have sampling of the traditional old foods, things like trachana. I mean, those sorts of things. Silopites. Yes, exactly. So way back to the old good old-fashioned Mediterranean diet.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And congratulations once again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Σήμερα βρισκόμαστε σε εκδήλωση που διοργάνωσε το Oeega για να τιμήσει και να αναγνωρίσει τις νοσοκόμες του 1915 που πήγαν στο νησί το ελληνικό τη Λίμνο για να προσφέρουν τις υπηρεσίες τους να νοσηλεύσουν τους τραυματίες του πολέμου. Μαζί μου έχω τον πρόξενο, τον κύριο Γούρα, που παραβρέθηκε εδώ μαζί με άλλους πολιτικούς. Χαλό κύριε Γούρα, τι κάνετε?
Μια χαρά, δέξτε το χαίρομαι που σας αναβλέπω.
Και εγώ χαίρομαι πολύ.
Σαν Ανέστη.
Αληθώς Ανέστη. Πείτε μας τις εντυπώσεις σας για τη σημερινή εκδήλωση.
Πολύ ωραία, πάρα πολύ ωραία εκδήλωση. Σας αξίζουν συγχαρητήρια στην κυρία Χάλτη και σε όλες τις άλλες κυρίες της Oeega, που διοργάνωσαν μια ακόμα ωραία εκδήλωση. Όλες τις εκδηλώσεις Oeega που έχω παραστεί είναι πάρα πολύ ωραίες, αλλά αυτή ειδικά πιστεύω ήταν η καλύτερη. Και είναι πάρα πολύ σημαντικό αυτό, γιατί φέτος η Αυστραλία, αυτή η τόσο ωραία χώρα και η όμορφη χώρα, εορτάζει με τις άλλες χώρες της κοινοπολιτείας τα 100 χρόνια της εκστρατείας Καλυπόλεως, και η Ελλάδα συμμετείχε και σε αυτή την εκστρατεία. παραχωρώντας το νησί της Λίμνου. Χωρίς τη Λίμνο δεν θα ήταν δυνατόν να υπάρξει εκστρατεία της Καλυπόλεως, γιατί η Λίμνος ήταν το σημείο κινήσεως για την εκστρατεία. Οι σύμμαχοι χρειάζονταν μια βάση κοντά στα στενά. Δεν μπορούσε αυτή η βάση να είναι η Αίγυπτος, που είναι πάρα πολύ μακριά. Οπότε η Λίμνος εξυπηρέτησε αυτό το σκοπό. Και στη συνέχεια οι Έλληνες και οι Αυστραλοί πολέμησαν και στον Πρώτο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο και στον Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο και στον Ψυχρό Πόλεμο. Και τώρα στη μεταψυχροπολεμική εποχή πολεμούμε μαζί στους ίδιους αγώνες, όπως τώρα κατά του ISIS στη Μέση Ανατολή. Η Ελλάδα και η Αυστραλία είναι μέλη της συμμαχίας. Και αυτό που είναι σημαντικό και θέλω να υπογραμμίσω είναι ότι η Ελλάδα και η Αυστραλία πάντοτε ήταν στο ίδιο στρατόπεδο, πάντοτε ήμασταν σύμμαχοι, πάντοτε πολεμήσαμε για την ελευθερία, τη δημοκρατία, τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα, μαζί με τους άλλους μεγάλους μας συμμάχους, τις ΗΠΑ, το Ηνωμένο Βασίλειο, τον Καναδά, τη Νέα Ζηλανδία και τη Γαλλία και τις άλλες χώρες. Και αυτό συνεχίζεται ακόμα και σήμερα. Και αυτό είναι πάρα πολύ σημαντικό ότι αναδεικνύεται και ο ρόλος της Λίμνου. Γιατί πρέπει να θυμόμαστε ότι οι Έλληνες και οι Αυστραλοί δεν πολέμησαν, επαναλαμβάνω, μόνο στο Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο, αλλά πολέμησαν και στον Πρώτο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο μαζί. Ως εκ τούτου, είμαι πολύ χαρούμενος για την πολύ ωραία εκδήλωση που έλαβε η χώρα σήμερα. Και την άλλη Κυριακή, επίσης, ο Σύλλογος Λιμνίων θα τιμήσει και αυτός με τη σειρά του τη συνεισφορά της Λίμνου στην εκστρατεία της Καλυπόλεως με μια πολύ ωραία εκδήλωση που θα κάνει. Θα προηγηθεί η δοξολογία στον Ιερό Ναό του Αγίου Γεωργίου και μετά μια ωραία εκδήλωση στο κλαμπ τους. Και το Σάββατο επίσης και ο Σύλλογος των Λιμνίων θα τιμήσει στο RSL του Ροζέτα το Island Day. Εγώ προσωπικά ως πρίτανης του εδώ προξενικού σώματος, ως Dean του Consular Corps, θα έχω κληθεί να συμμετάσχω στους εορτασμούς στο North Terrace, στο μνημείο. Μετά θα παρακολουθήσω την παρέλαση και μετά θα παρασώσω δεξίως του κυβερνήτου. Οπότε πιστεύω ότι αυτό το γεγονός, όλες αυτές τις εκδηλώσεις υπογραμμίζουν τη συνεισφορά της Ελλάδος στην εκστρατεία της Καλυπόλεως. Όχι μόνο βέβαια σε αυτήν, αλλά μια που εορτάζουμε φέτος τα 100 χρόνια της εκστρατείας.
Είναι μια σημαντική χρονιά φέτος.
Ακριβώς.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ και θα σας δούμε την επόμενη φορά.
Την επόμενη Κυριακή βέβαια, ασφαλώς. Χάρηκα.
Γεια σας. With me I have Major Christopher Rowe, the manager of the Army Museum of South Australia. Hello and welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
And you're the keynote speaker today.
Yes, I was. It was my great pleasure to be at such an enjoyable function.
Thank you very much for that. And you presented a great, informative, and a very comprehensive presentation regarding the nurses in Lemnos. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's very kind of you to say that, Dora. But yeah, I did quite a bit of research on it, and Helen and Petula gave me some ideas what they wanted me to talk about. And so I put it together into a sort of a package and found some photos and told a few little stories and tried to emphasise the role of the nurses, but talk a bit about Lemnos and a bit about the Gallipoli campaign, and then a bit about how we should try to remember this day, or the fact that we're 100 years on from the 25th of April 1915, and it's important to get our minds around that.
Very important year for the Anzacs.
Absolutely, yep. Yes. And because I work in museums, Dora, then we have our own displays that commemorate that. And I'm sure some of the people who are here today will go down to the museum on their way out. But I think it's nice to go away a bit from the military and the fighting and look at the nurses and look at some areas that perhaps we don't pay as much attention to as we normally would do. And that's why I was keen to support this function, because it aimed at a slightly different area of interest.
Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you to Helen for the great event today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you to Helen and Petula for the fantastic Greek desserts. They're still being eaten at my house now, and for those I'll be happy to speak at any Greek function in the future.
And also thank you to the volunteers who helped here today.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'd like to thank you very much for supporting us, for going along with what we wanted, you saying, but also giving us the World War I perspective as well. Also your volunteers, your museum, everything's been absolutely magnificent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Helen. It's our pleasure to help. That's what we're here to do, to support people who have an interest in history.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Here I have George Markopoulos, who attended the Oeega function.
Yes.
Hello, George.
Hi, Dora. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. And tell me, did you enjoy the function today?
I enjoyed it very much. I thought it was very informative. I've always known about the heroics of Australian soldiers. I didn't know as much about the nurses and the work that they did. My wife and I have recently been to America, and we spent some time in Washington. and there's a memorial there that the American soldiers put up for the females, the nurses, and others that served in their armed forces against, their enemy. And for me to find out about the Australian nurses and the work that they did at Lemnos, helping the Anzacs, with all that they faced at Gallipoli, was very informative. They were quite heroic. They worked in very primitive conditions, very little in terms of technology like we have today, and yet, as we heard, they were able to save lots of people. The mortality rate, as I understand, was 3%. That means, 97 people out of 100 survived. So that was fantastic, their efforts in terms of saving Australian soldiers. So it was great. I really enjoyed it.
That was a great contribution from the nurses.
Absolutely, absolutely. We hear about, people at the front and what they do, but there's so much that's done behind the scenes in terms of supporting them, just, providing the supplies with medical care, with assistance, all of those sorts of things. And these young ladies to go into that sort of war zone and to work as hard as they did to help those young boys that went out there was fantastic.
Yes, and when nurses contributing towards the community always.
Absolutely,
they're great in their jobs.
That's right. They're very positive. They provide healing in many ways, not just physical healing, but I'm sure emotional healing. The time that they would have spent with those soldiers, who'd come back, who were injured, and just to reassure them, to give them words of comfort, it would have been fantastic, I think, for those boys. Yeah, as they
Thank you for that, George, and thank you for attending today.
My pleasure, Dora. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great.
Can you hear Australia's heroes marching? Can you hear them as they march into eternity? There will never be a greater love. There just couldn't be a greater sacrifice. There just couldn't be.
Ναι, οι νοσοκόμες το 1915 έπαιξαν μεγάλο ρόλο και τους ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Είμαστε πολύ περήφανοι όλοι για τις προσφορές που έδωσαν τότε. Ήταν πολύ δύσκολη η κατάσταση, αλλά τα κατάφεραν και συγχαρητήρια. Και τους αξίζει ένα μνημείο, να τους θυμόμαστε πάντα.
Ναι, βέβαια. Και νομίζω κάτι σκοπεύει μια επιτροπή.
Κάτι γίνεται, νομίζω. Ναι. Και συγχαρητήρια και στο Oeega, που διοργάνωσε μια πάρα πολύ ωραία εκδήλωση για να τιμήσει την ημέρα αυτή και τις νοσοκόμες του 1915. Αυτά είχαμε για απόψε, Μπάρμπαρα. Ελπίζουμε να σας άρεσε το πρόγραμμα. Μέχρι την άλλη φορά που θα σας δούμε, να είστε καλά, να περνάτε ωραία και χρόνια πολλά σε όλους, σε ό,τι και γιορτάζετε. Τα γενέθλια, επέτειο, οτιδήποτε γιορτάζετε, την ονομαστική εορτή. Να είστε καλά.
Yes, we congratulate our Oeega for another fantastic event. Wonderful initiative to acknowledge these wonderful Australian women that went over to the then very barren and remote part of the island of Lemnos to care for the wounded Australian and New Zealand soldiers. The laying of the wreaths, all the dignitaries that were present, the wonderful museum set up to give a reflection of what was used and the type of things that people did at the time. Great initiative, and if anyone's interested, they can go along to the Army Barracks to have a look at this museum and presentation. So keep up the good work, Oeega, and we look forward to the next event about it's a food forum. So look out for the next program for lots of other interesting things that are happening right here in Adelaide within the Hellenic sphere. See you, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.